Have you ever noticed that the real danger in society often doesn't come from the openly malicious, but from the seemingly ordinary people who refuse to think for themselves? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian and resistance fighter against the Nazis, put this into words more clearly than anyone else. He once wrote, "Against stupidity, we are defenseless." These weren't the cynical reflections of an armchair philosopher. They were the words of a man who risked everything to stand against one of history's most destructive regimes. A man who realized that the survival of evil depends less on the wickedness of a few and more on the thoughtlessness of the many. When we think of evil, we imagine dictators, ruthless criminals, or those who knowingly commit acts of violence and deceit. Evil is frightening, yes, but it is visible. It can be identified, confronted, punished. Stupidity, however, is different. Bonhoeffer recognized during the rise of Nazism that entire swaths of society fell into line not because they were inherently evil, but because they stopped thinking critically. They repeated slogans. They obeyed orders. They allowed others to do the thinking for them. For Bonhoeffer, this was the most chilling realization, that stupidity is not simply a lack of intelligence, but a dangerous social condition. So what did he actually mean by stupidity? It's not about IQ. A person can be highly educated, even brilliant in their field, and still act stupidly. Stupidity, as Bonhoeffer defined it, is the refusal to use one's own reason. It's the surrender of independent thought. A stupid person is not just uninformed. They are someone who has chosen convenience over responsibility. They echo what others say. They stop asking questions. They hand over their judgment to authority or to the crowd. In this sense, stupidity is a form of self-imposed blindness. Why then is stupidity more dangerous than evil? Because the stupid person, unlike the evil one, is convinced they are doing the right thing. The evil person knows they are lying, cheating, or destroying. The stupid person truly believes they are defending truth and virtue. This makes stupidity impervious to reason. Arguments bounce off. Evidence doesn't penetrate. In fact, trying to reason with stupidity often provokes hostility, not reflection. The stupid person feels attacked, not enlightened. That is why Bonhoeffer insisted, with evil, there is still the possibility of confrontation. With stupidity, you hit a wall. But the key insight is this: stupidity doesn't primarily arise in individuals. It flourishes in groups. Bonhoeffer saw that people often become less independent when absorbed into a crowd, not more. In movements, in parties, in masses, people surrender their thinking to the collective. They allow slogans and leaders to dictate reality. That's what makes totalitarian systems so lethal. They don't need millions of evil masterminds, they only need millions of people willing to stop thinking for themselves. Ordinary citizens, neighbors, co-workers, people who nod along because everyone else is nodding too. And here lies the terrifying paradox. Evil may be active, calculated, and deliberate, but its reach is limited without stupidity to carry it. Stupidity spreads like a contagion. It multiplies in groups, it resists logic, and it turns entire populations into instruments of destruction without them even realizing it. For Bonhoeffer, this was the heart of the matter. Societies don't collapse simply because a few wicked men rise to power. They collapse because masses of people, ordinary people, choose not to think. Bonhoeffer's most unsettling insight was this: stupidity is not just an individual weakness, it is a social phenomenon. It doesn't simply arise in a person's mind, it spreads through environments shaped by power, fear, and conformity. At first glance, this seems strange. Isn't stupidity just a matter of not knowing enough? Shouldn't education fix it? Bonhoeffer disagreed. He had watched professors, judges, businessmen, and church leaders, many of them well-educated, some even brilliant, act in the stupidest possible ways. They weren't stupid because of a lack of knowledge. They were stupid because they surrendered their responsibility to think independently. He observed that when people are isolated, they often remain capable of reason. Alone, a person may weigh arguments carefully, wrestle with moral questions, and see through lies. But in a group, something changes. Surrounded by the crowd, under pressure from authority, many people stop thinking for themselves. They echo what others say. They trade independence for belonging. That, Bonhoeffer argued, is where stupidity flourishes. It grows not in solitude, but in collectives, not in freedom, but under the weight of power. Why does power have this effect? Because power creates pressure. When authority becomes overwhelming, Whether through propaganda, fear, or mass enthusiasm, people instinctively seek safety and conformity. It is easier and often safer to go along than to resist. Bonhoeffer suggested that stupidity often serves as a psychological shield. By choosing not to think, the individual avoids conflict with the group. By surrendering judgment, they escape responsibility. The price of this safety, however, is the loss of freedom. This is why stupidity spreads like an infection. It is less about ignorance and more about the deep human instinct to adapt to the prevailing winds of power. That makes it far more dangerous than we like to admit. Because if stupidity thrives under power, then no one is immune. Intelligence, education, experience, none of these guarantee resistance. In fact, the more overwhelming the environment, the more likely even intelligent people will give up independent thought in order to fit in. Bonhoeffer witnessed this firsthand. During the Nazi regime, many citizens who had once been thoughtful, moral individuals became unthinking instruments of propaganda. Teachers turned into indoctrinators. Clergy repeated party slogans. Neighbors betrayed neighbors, not necessarily out of deep malice, but because they had ceased to think on their own. That's why he described stupidity as a social disease. It doesn't spread because people lack brains. It spreads because they lack courage. The courage to ask, "Is this true?" The courage to resist the pull of the crowd. The courage to stand apart when everyone else goes along. Bonhoeffer insisted that stupidity is more dangerous than deliberate evil because evil depends on it. A tyrant cannot rule alone. Lies cannot dominate unless people repeat them. Injustice cannot persist without millions of ordinary citizens who comply without thought. Evil may light the spark, but stupidity provides the fuel. Psychologically, we can think of stupidity as a kind of mental laziness. It is comfortable. It frees people from the burden of responsibility. If someone else is making the decisions, if the group has already decided what is true, then why struggle? Why think? But what looks like relief is actually enslavement. The stupid person is not free. They are dependent on slogans, on leaders, on the herd. Their identity becomes borrowed, their judgment outsourced. This is why Bonhoeffer was so adamant. Stupidity is not a private flaw, but a collective danger. It grows where structures of power suppress freedom. It spreads in crowds, in movements, in political systems that demand loyalty over truth. He even called it a captivity of the mind. The stupid person is not merely mistaken. They are trapped. And in that trap, they can become a tool of forces far beyond their own comprehension. This realization makes Bonhoeffer's theory so unsettling even today. Because if stupidity is a social disease, then it can infect entire nations. And once it takes hold, it can destroy everything in its path. If Bonhoeffer's words are unsettling, this part of his theory is downright chilling. Stupidity, he argued, is almost impossible to cure. Not because people are hopelessly foolish, but because stupidity is not a defect of the intellect. It is a condition of the will, a refusal, conscious or unconscious, to think. Most people assume that stupidity can be fixed with more information. If someone only knew the facts, surely they would see the truth. But Bonhoeffer saw the opposite. Facts bounce off stupidity like pebbles off a wall. You can pile up evidence, cite logic, present data. The stupid person doesn't yield. Why? Because stupidity is not about knowing too little. It's about choosing not to use one's own reason. It's a kind of self-protection. Thinking critically is risky. It might force you to question authority. It might isolate you from the group. It might demand responsibility. For many, it feels safer to shut the mind off and cling to slogans. That's why Bonhoeffer called stupidity more dangerous than malice. Evil at least knows what it's doing. The evil person calculates, schemes, deceives. But the stupid person sincerely believes they are right. They aren't resisting arguments because they are stubborn. They are resisting because their entire identity is tied to the group's opinion. To question the idea would be to question themselves, and that feels unbearable. Bonhoeffer described this as a kind of spiritual captivity. The stupid person cannot be persuaded because they are not really listening. They are reacting. Arguments don't reach them. They trigger defense. It's tempting to think the answer is sharper debate or louder protest. But Bonhoeffer insisted this was futile. The more you argue with stupidity, the more it digs in. The more you press facts, the more they are dismissed as lies or manipulation. What you see as clarification, the stupid person feels as an attack. That's why Bonhoeffer concluded that stupidity cannot be conquered by instruction alone. It must be broken by liberation. Liberation, for him, meant a profound shift in circumstances. Stupidity thrives in an atmosphere of domination, fear, and group pressure. Remove those conditions, and the person might regain their independence. Collapse the structures of propaganda and power, and the fog begins to lift. In other words, stupidity isn't cured in the classroom. It's cured in freedom. Only when people are free from fear, free from oppression, free from blind conformity, do they become capable of genuine self-criticism. This insight is sobering. It means that stupidity is not primarily an individual issue, but a societal one. You can't fix a stupid person by arguing harder. You can only change the environment that makes stupidity appealing. And yet, there is hope here. Bonhoeffer did not believe people were doomed to stupidity forever. He believed that once external pressures are removed, once people reclaim their independence, their capacity for reason can return. The chains can break. Think of it this way. Stupidity is not permanent blindness. It is more like a willful closing of the eyes. People close their eyes when the light is too harsh, when the truth feels too dangerous, when it's easier to be guided by someone else. But when the environment changes, when the danger recedes, when courage awakens, the eyes can open again. That is why Bonhoeffer tied the cure for stupidity not to argument but to freedom. Freedom is what restores the ability to think. Freedom is what allows people to take responsibility again. Freedom is what makes truth visible once more. And so, Bonhoeffer left us with a paradox. Stupidity is almost impossible to cure from the outside, yet it is not irreversible. It cannot be reasoned away, but it can be broken when people are liberated, socially, politically, spiritually. For him, that was the path forward. Not louder voices, not sharper arguments, but creating conditions where people could once again be free, and with freedom, regain their capacity for truth. When Bonhoeffer wrote about stupidity, he was careful to stress one thing: stupidity is not the opposite of intelligence. Some of the most intelligent people of his time behaved in profoundly stupid ways. He had seen lawyers, professors, even theologians, highly trained, highly educated individuals, blindly support the Nazi regime. Their intelligence didn't save them. The opposite of stupidity, then, is not cleverness. It is wisdom. But what's the difference? Intelligence is a skill. It is the ability to analyze, to solve problems, to process information quickly. Wisdom, on the other hand, is not just about skill. It is about orientation. It is the commitment to seek truth, even when it is uncomfortable. It is the courage to act responsibly, even when it is costly. An intelligent person might win debates, outwit opponents, or design complex systems. But a wise person looks deeper. They ask, is this good? Is this true? Is this just? This is why Bonhoeffer believed wisdom was the true antidote to stupidity. Not more raw intelligence, but the strength to think independently, to resist slogans, and to remain free even under pressure. During the Nazi era, Germany had no shortage of intelligence. The country boasted world-class scientists, artists, and philosophers. And yet, many of these brilliant minds lent their talents to destruction. They used reason as a servant of ideology. They were intelligent, yes, but they were not wise. Wisdom, Bonhoeffer argued, demands independence. To be wise means being willing to stand apart, to endure ridicule, even to face danger, rather than surrender the truth to the crowd. Wisdom is not measured by how much you know, but by how faithfully you think for yourself. We can see this difference even in everyday life. The stupid person seeks belonging over truth. They repeat what others say. They adapt to the environment. They would rather fit in than confront. The wise person, by contrast, may risk standing alone. They are willing to wrestle with doubt, to admit ignorance, to ask difficult questions. They are not driven by what is easy, but by what is real. Psychologists might frame it like this: stupidity is rooted in ego protection. The stupid person defends their sense of safety by shutting out uncomfortable realities. Wisdom, on the other hand, requires humility. The wise person is willing to feel uncomfortable, to accept vulnerability, to let go of illusions. This distinction mattered deeply to Bonhoeffer because he saw its consequences for society. A nation that values intelligence without wisdom may produce geniuses, but it will also be capable of monstrous acts. Intelligence without wisdom builds propaganda machines. It designs weapons. It justifies tyranny. A society that values wisdom, however, fosters something else: responsibility. People are encouraged not just to know more, but to live truthfully. They are taught not just to be clever, but to be courageous. And here's where Bonhoeffer's insight still cuts deep today. We live in a world overflowing with information. Never before have facts been so accessible. Knowledge is everywhere, yet wisdom remains rare. Social media amplifies this imbalance. People showcase intelligence, quick wit, and clever arguments, but often without depth, without responsibility, without truth. It is easy to look smart in a 30-second clip. It is much harder to be wise in the face of pressure. Bonhoeffer's warning echoes. Without wisdom, intelligence can serve the worst causes. Without wisdom, societies collapse into conformity. Without wisdom, the masses become susceptible to stupidity, no matter how well educated they are. That's why he framed stupidity not as a failure of intellect, but as a failure of courage. And why he pointed to wisdom as the only real alternative. Wisdom requires independence, humility, and a willingness to suffer for the sake of truth. Stupidity, meanwhile, seeks comfort, safety, and the illusion of belonging. Two paths of the mind, two ways of living. One leads to freedom, the other to captivity. And it is here, Bonhoeffer suggests, that the fate of any society is decided. When we read Bonhoeffer's reflections on stupidity, it's hard not to feel like he was speaking directly to our own time. He wrote in the 1940s, in the shadow of Nazi tyranny, but his insights reach far beyond that context. Everywhere we look, we can see the same patterns he described. People repeating slogans instead of thinking, groups preferring easy answers over difficult truths, societies valuing comfort more than responsibility. So what do we do with Bonhoeffer's unsettling diagnosis? If stupidity is a social disease that resists argument, what does it mean for us today? The first lesson is this: stupidity is not simply ignorance. Bonhoeffer insisted that even the well-educated can fall into stupidity if they abandon responsibility. That means education alone is not enough. Access to information alone is not enough. The crucial question is whether we have the courage to think independently. The second lesson is that facts, by themselves, rarely change anything. Bonhoeffer saw that confronting stupidity with logic is usually futile. People trapped in stupidity do not hear facts as helpful corrections. They hear them as attacks. That doesn't mean truth is useless, but it does mean we must recognize that the real battle is not just intellectual. It is moral and social. People must first be free in order to truly hear. The third lesson is personal responsibility. Stupidity thrives when people seek comfort above all else. The comfort of belonging, the comfort of not having to wrestle with hard questions, the comfort of avoiding conflict. Resisting stupidity requires the opposite: the willingness to ask, to doubt, to risk standing apart. These lessons are more relevant than ever in the digital age. Our world is saturated with information, yet instead of making us wiser, it often overwhelms us. Social media algorithms reward what is simple, emotional, and viral, not what is nuanced, complex, and thoughtful. Outrage travels faster than reflection. Memes spread quicker than truth. In this environment, stupidity is not just tolerated, it is amplified. Echo chambers form, where people only hear what they already believe. Parroting becomes the norm. Slogans replace arguments. The very conditions Bonhoeffer described, mass conformity, the outsourcing of thought, the surrender of responsibility, are reinforced by technology every day. And yet Bonhoeffer's theory is not just a warning, it is also a call. It is a call to resist by becoming wise rather than clever. A call to choose independence of thought over comfort. A call to embrace freedom not as license to do whatever we want, but as the responsibility to seek truth, even when it costs us. Bonhoeffer himself lived this call to its extreme. He resisted when others conformed. He spoke when others were silent. He took responsibility when others looked away. And for that, he paid with his life. But his legacy endures, precisely because he refused to let stupidity have the last word. What does that mean for us? It means we must cultivate spaces where freedom of thought can survive. In our homes, in our schools, in our conversations, we must encourage questioning, curiosity, and the courage to disagree. We must resist the temptation to silence others just because their questions make us uncomfortable. It means we must train ourselves not to settle for the easy answer. Not every problem can be reduced to a slogan or a soundbite. Truth is often messy, complex, and uncomfortable. To be wise is to embrace that discomfort rather than hide from it. And it means that, at the most personal level, each of us has a choice. We can hand over our minds to the crowd, or we can take responsibility for them. We can chase comfort, or we can seek truth. We can become part of the machinery of stupidity, or we can resist it. Bonhoeffer's theory reminds us that stupidity is dangerous not because it is laughable, but because it is powerful. It can take over whole societies, it can destroy nations, but it is not inevitable. The antidote is freedom, courage, and wisdom. And so the challenge he leaves us is simple but demanding. Do not surrender your mind. Think for yourself. Take responsibility. Choose truth over comfort, because in the end, stupidity may be humanity's greatest threat, but wisdom will always be its greatest hope. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective on Bonhoeffer's theory.